There is a price at which a town stops arguing about a thing and agrees, all at once, that it is dead. Out here, that price gets printed on a courthouse notice, and it is usually small. $200. Cash as it stands. No warranty of any kind. A widow of 54 denied her husband's railroad pension on a paperwork technicality. Counted that exact sum onto a county table for a sealed brick roundhouse chained shut 7 winters, while the scrap dealer who wanted its brick priced her out loud in the hallway. What none of them troubled to check was what the building still held upright in its farthest stall, and why one small power bill there kept being paid. Settle in somewhere warm and tell us where in the world you are listening from. The snow had started before noon, and by 3 o'clock Ruth Sundberg stood in it in front of the roundhouse, a woman of 54 in a heavy gray overcoat and a knotted brown headscarf, the county's keys closed in one glove. 11 arched stalls in a half-circle of dark red brick, 200 feet from horn to horn. The turntable pit drifted almost level, one stall's timber doors hanging open. Deep inside that stall, something enormous and black stood on the rails, and one window was burning high in the brick above the arch. Not reflecting. Burning, a steady warm amber square set 40 feet up in a wall that had been chained shut since October of 1952. The bulb behind it plainly lit, and the snow slanting through the glow of it in long threads. The power company pulled the meters on dead buildings. Everybody knew that. A pulled meter got a building written down derelict, and a derelict building got taken for taxes and sold for brick, which was exactly how she came to be standing in a snowfield holding a key ring in brown paper. She had left the truck back at the cattle guard, where the drifts ran deeper than the bumper, and walked the last quarter-mile in along the frozen ballast in rubber overshoes buckled to the ankle, past telegraph poles leaning away from 30 years of north wind with their crossarms bare. The building came up out of the snow bigger than she had permitted herself to remember. Dead thistle stood out of the white in the turntable pit, and the table still bridged it with its rails aimed at that one open stall, and nothing moved on the whole flat ground but the snow coming down between her and it. The shape on the rails kept its shoulders in shadow, and a little brass on it caught what light there was and gave back a dull yellow. Ruth stood there long enough for the cold to get in through the wool at her shoulders. Then she walked to the open stall and stepped in out of the snow and let her eyes adjust. The smell hit her first, and it was not the smell of a ruin. Ruins smell of wet ash and mouse. This smelled of cold iron and cylinder oil and the sweetish fat smell of tallow, and under it, faintly, of coffee grounds, which made no sense at all. Snow had blown a white tongue in through the doorway and stopped. Beyond it, the floor pit was swept, in the deliberate half-circles a man makes with a push-broom. The locomotive stood over the pit, with its pilot pointed out at the turntable, covered from the stack to the cab roof in brown depot canvas, laced down with sash cord and tied off in flat proper knots. Where the canvas ended, she could see the driving wheels, taller than she was, and the rods were not rusted. They were slick and heavy with grease, thumbed over so evenly that she could see the swirl marks of the rag. She put one glove on the cold iron and took it away with tallow on the leather. Somebody had greased a dead engine. Somebody had swept a dead floor. Somebody was paying for a light in a building the county had just sold her for $200, because the county had decided nothing out here was worth anything anymore. She did not go up into the cab. She did not untie one knot. She stood in the doorway of the stall, with the snow at her back, and her heart going harder than the walk explained, and she made herself say the only sensible thing out loud, in the flat voice she used for adding a column twice. "All right," she said. "All right then, The window above the arch was still burning when she looked back from the cattle guard, 1 amber square and 200 feet of black brick. And she drove into town in the dark, with the question sitting in the seat beside her the whole 11 miles. Somebody was paying that bill. Her husband had been dead since March. She had been born in 1905, 9 miles the other side of town, in a claim shack her father had bought for the lumber in it. He was a section hand who could line a mile of track dead true with his eye, and he was killed in 1919 when a handcar went under a work extra at the Redwater crossing. The railroad paid her mother $1,100 and considered the matter closed. Ruth went to work in 1922, at 17, in the railroad lunchroom on the platform at Ardmore, where the eastbound stopped 20 minutes for dinner and 30 men came through a door built for 6. Mabel Ostrand ran that lunchroom, and Mabel Ostrand was the education Ruth got. She was 44 then, a square woman with forearms like a pitcher's, and she taught the girl in order, the way she did everything. First, accounts in ink, never pencil, because pencil is an argument waiting to happen and ink is a fact. Second, how to feed 30 men on 4 hours' notice. Third, invisible mending. Fourth, remedies, including what to do for a man who has taken a face full of steam. Fifth, and she said this one oftener than the rest, take stock before you take opinions. Count the shelf. Then talk. Ruth counted the shelf for 6 years, and in 1928, at 23, she married the Roundhouse man who had been coming in for the meatloaf on Thursdays, for 2 of them, without ever finishing a sentence at her. Emil Sundberg was 31, born in 1897, hired at Ardmore in 1919 at 22 years old. He was a big, slow-moving man with hands he could not get clean past the second knuckle, and he wrote things down. That was the whole of him, and she found out over 31 years that it was more than most people had. He wrote what he did each day in a nickel notebook, and when one filled, he put it in the drawer and started another. Boiler washes. Flu dates. What a job cost. Never a feeling, not once. But if you wanted to know what happened at Ardmore on a Tuesday in 1941, the answer was in a cigar box in the front room. He made foreman in 1938. There were 60 men in that shop in the war years, and a whistle that split the town open at 7 and again at noon, and Ruth got used to a house that smelled of coal smoke. Then the mine slowed, and the road bought diesels, and in the fall of 1952 they dropped the last fire at Ardmore. They took the men into the shop office one afternoon and read out the list. 14 were let go outright. 9 were offered the new diesel shop in the city, 260 miles east. Emil Sundberg, foreman, was offered a job there at $96 a week, and he came home and sat down at the kitchen table and said no. Not no with an explanation, just no. I am staying on here, he said. They want a caretaker on the property. $29 a week. 29, Ruth said. That is right. Emil, you are making 88. I know what I am making. That was the entire conversation in 1952, and it was very nearly the entire conversation for the 7 years that came after it. She was 53 when she finally understood it, and 54 before she believed it, and by then he had been in the ground at Rose Hill for 6 months. $29 a week is not a living for 2, so Ruth went back into a kitchen, this time the school lunchroom, and served creamed chicken to other women's grandchildren for 11 years. They lost the good car. Twice she opened the drawer where the pay envelopes went and found them lighter than they should have been, and when she asked, he said he had spent it, and would not say on what. That is the part the town saw. A man with a good name who let a good job go by, kept a lantern job at a dead building, and did not have money he ought to have had. Ardmore is 900 people, and it did not take them long to decide what a man like that was spending it on. The two theories that got the most use were the one about the bottle and the one about a woman in Havre. Ruth heard both. She never once heard him deny either, because nobody ever put it to his face, and because he was not a man you put anything to. He died on the 11th of March, 1959, sitting up in the truck at the yard gate with the heater on, 61 years old. In his coat pocket there was a nickel notebook with the week's entries in it, and the last line, written in that small upright hand on the morning of the day he died, said, "Barred 9 1/4 turn, north side, all free." She read it at her own table and had no idea in the world what it meant. The rest came fast, as it does. The railroad retirement people wrote to say the widow's annuity had been figured on creditable service, that his last 7 years fell outside the covered classification, and that the amount payable would be $31 a month. When everything owing was paid, Ruth Sundberg had $406 in the world: a house, an old truck, and a name in a small town that had filed her under women owed an apology by somebody dead. She would have said, if anyone had asked, that she was not angry. Nobody asked. The county advertised the property in the paper for 3 weeks running: 11-stall brick roundhouse, machine shop, sand house, turntable, 10 acres, delinquent taxes of $200, sale to the highest bidder at the courthouse. The 6th of December, 1959, as it stands. Ruth read that notice 4 times over 3 weeks, and each time she got up and did something else. On the morning of the 6th, she put on the gray coat and drove in, and the courthouse hallway had 11 people in it, which for Ardmore in December is a crowd. Lyle Pruitt had come up from the city. He was 58 and wore a camel haircoat in a town where no coat was ever camel, and he had the manner of a man doing the room a favor by being in it. He bought dead things for what could be cut out of them, and he had taken the depot at Kestrel Siding the year before for its brick. Dwight Sundberg was there too, in the insurance man's overcoat, with Doreen beside him. Emil's brother had not been out to the yard in 20 years, nor to the house since the funeral lunch, at which he ate and left inside of 40 minutes. Merle Dunning, the county clerk, stood on the second stair with his glasses down his nose and read the notice aloud, and it took him 90 seconds. "Minimum bid is $200, cash or certified," he said. "As it stands, no warranty as to condition, title as recorded." "Do I have the minimum?" "You have it," Ruth said. Every head in that hallway came around, and then something happened that she had known was coming and had decided in advance not to mind, which is not the same as not minding. Somebody laughed, up near the radiator, the short surprised laugh a man gives when he has been handed a joke he did not have to work for. Pruitt turned all the way around to look at her, and he smiled, and he spoke to the hallway rather than to her, which is its own kind of answer. "Mrs. Sundberg," he said, "that is 110,000 brick out there and about 2 miles of rail I have not priced yet. I will give you 300 cash in this hallway right now, and you can walk out $100 ahead of where you walked in, which is a better day than anybody else in this building is going to have. No thank you. You understand there is no roof over the east 6 stalls. I understand the notice." He read it twice. Doreen Sundberg said, not loudly, but at exactly the volume a woman uses when she means to be heard by everyone in a hallway and quoted by all of them, "She has been left with nothing, and she is buying a hole in the ground. Somebody ought to stop her." Ruth, Dwight came over then, and he did the thing where a man puts his hand on your arm to make the conversation look private. Ruth, listen to me. That building took my brother's whole life and left you with a truck. Now you are going to hand $200 of what you have got left to the county for the privilege of paying taxes on it. Take the man's $300. I am telling you this as family. You have not been out there, Dwight. I do not need to go out there. No, Ruth said. You never did. She got her purse out and counted the money onto the table at the foot of the stairs, in front of all of them, because Mabel Ostrand had taught her 37 years earlier that money counted in the open cannot be argued about afterward. 450s, counted twice. 200, Merle Dunning said. Any other bid? There was not. There was only the pleasure of the hallway, which costs nothing and buys nothing. Sold then to Ruth Sundberg as it stands. He gave her a receipt and a ring of keys in brown paper that had been in the clerk's vault since '52, and he was decent about it, and did not meet her eye. Pruitt was still there when she came out. You will be back, he said, pleasant as weather. In the spring, when the taxes come due and the roof goes, you will call me, and I will still pay you $300, and we will both pretend this morning did not happen. Good afternoon, Mr. Pruitt. That was the whole of it. They never spoke again. None of the three of them ever set foot on that property, and that fact turned out to matter more than anything any of them said. 4 days later, on the 10th, Ruth stood under the drugstore awning and waited with Mabel Ostrand for the eastbound bus to Spokane. Mabel was 81 and going to her daughter's for good, with 2 grips and a hatbox and the enormous dignity of a woman who has decided a thing herself. She was the last person alive who had known Ruth as a girl who could not yet keep a column straight. You bought it, Mabel said. I bought it. Doreen Sundberg is telling the Altar Guild you have gone off your head with grief. She would. I told her grief makes some women buy hats. Mabel looked out at the snow crossing the street in ropes. Ruthie, what is out there? And Ruth told her. The swept floor, the canvas laced down in flat proper knots. The rods slicked over with tallow. A light burning 40 feet up in a chained building 7 years after the last fire was dropped. And a power company that pulls meters on dead buildings, and had not pulled that one. Mabel listened to all of it without moving. Then she took off her right glove, worked at her coat pocket, and put into Ruth's hand a brass meal check from the lunchroom, thin as a leaf, with the number worn clean off it by 40 years of thumbs. I gave one of these to your husband once, she said. He gave it back. Said he had not paid for the pie yet, and would not carry the receipt for it. She closed Ruth's fingers over the brass. Now you listen to me, because I am going to be in Washington and no use to you. Nothing is scrapped till the last man who knew its worth quits looking at it. You remember that when they laugh at you, and they are going to laugh at you until about the middle of June. The bus came. Ruth put the 2 grips up herself. Mabel took the step with both hands on the rail and turned at the top of it with the snow blowing past her, and said one more thing, and the door folded shut on it before Ruth could ask her what she meant. Go up in the cab, Mabel said. Emile kept his notebooks where his hands were. She went out the next morning with a thermos, a flashlight, a push broom, and a 5-pound sack of flour, because a woman who has been in a kitchen since she was 17 does not go anywhere empty-handed, and could not have told you why she brought flour to a roundhouse. The sun was out, and the cold had gone hard and blue behind it. She got the truck through the drift by the county road on the second run, and parked in the lee of the sand house, and the first thing she found on that property was not the engine. It was a boy, asleep in the sand house, on a bed of sacking, with his boots off and his socks drying on a nail and a cardboard suitcase for a pillow. He came up out of it fast and got his back against the wall, 19 years old, thin as a rail, with a raw wind-burned face and his coat held shut by a horse blanket pin. "I am not stealing anything," he said. "There is nothing in here to steal. I know what is in here. I own it." Ruth looked at the socks on the nail and at the two empty bean cans set neatly one inside the other in the corner, which told her more about him than his face did. "How long?" "4 nights. What is your name?" "Toby Renner. Where from?" "Havre. I was going to Billings. There is a fellow there says he can get me on with a paving outfit in the spring." He swallowed. "The spring is a ways off." "It is." She set the thermos on the sandhopper, unscrewed the cup, poured it full and held it out at arm's length, and did not come any closer, because a hungry animal wants room. "That is coffee with milk in it. There is no work here and no money, and I have got about $200 to my name, so I am not going to lie to you about it. But there is a stove in the shop if the pipe is any good, and I have got flour, and I would take it as a favor if you would carry a broom for me today, because I am 54 and there is a great deal of floor out there." He took the cup in both hands. "You bought this place?" "On Sunday last. Why?" "I will tell you when I know," Ruth said. They found the stovepipe sound. They swept the shop out, and under an oiled paper cover on the long bench lay a lathe with its ways still bright, a drill press, and 11 wrenches hung on painted outlines of themselves, so that a missing wrench would show as a white shape on the wall. Nothing was missing. At noon, Ruth climbed up into the cab of the locomotive. She had never been in one in her life. 31 years married to the man who ran that building, and she had stood on the ground beside it 100 times and never once gone up, because in 1928 a woman did not, and by 52 nobody had thought to ask her. The cab was swept, and there was a broom in the corner. The gauge glass was drained, the tricocks open. The fire door shut on a firebox with 2 pans of quicklime in it, and every brass fitting wrapped in a rag tied with string. Under the fireman's seat there was a wooden box, and in the box there were notebooks. 28 of them, banded in 4s with rubber bands gone sticky, every one in the small upright hand she knew. She sat down with the flashlight in her teeth and opened the top one, and it was the 7 years of her marriage she had not been able to account for, written down a line at a time. Slushed rods in motion, both sides, tallow and cylinder oil. Barred 9 1/4 turn, south side, all free. Rain in at the East Valley, laid 4 sheets, $2.10 the sheet, paid Kellum. Dues received, 11 men. Power bill paid, $1.90. Page after page of it, for 84 months, in a hand that never once said why. She sat in that cold cab until her feet went numb, and when she climbed down her face was the same face she had gone up with, because she had not been raised to have any other kind. Her hands were shaking. She went and held the stove until they stopped. If you've made it this far into her story, take a second and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. Because what was behind the lead-filled lock at the back of that building is the part I have been waiting to tell you. The old man came out on the 3rd day and parked at the cattle guard and did not get out of his car. Ruth walked down to him. He rolled the window halfway, and she saw a face like a drop plate, all fine cracks under a cap with ear flaps, and hands on the wheel with the knuckles swollen out of true. "Halvor Nyquist," he said. "I hostled here 31 years. I turned that engine on that table more times than you have had birthdays. I know who you are. You carried my father out of the Redwater crossing." "That is right. I did. He looked past her at the building a while. "They are saying in town you gave $200 for a hole in the ground." "They are. Uh-huh." His jaw worked. "Does the light still burn?" "It does." Halvor Nyquist nodded slowly, and his eyes went wet in the manner of very old men in cold air, which proves nothing at all. "Then he did it," he said. "Then by God he did it." And he put the car in gear, and Ruth put her hand flat on the door. "Mr. Nyquist, did what?" "I promised him," the old man said, and the window went up, and the car went off down the county road with a plume of snow behind it, and she stood in the tire ruts with her mouth open and no answer in it. She spent the next 11 days taking stock, because that is what she had been taught to do before she took an opinion, and she wrote it in a school tablet with a fountain pen. Stalls 1 through 5, roof sound. Stalls 6 through 11, roof gone or going. The shop dry, lathe and drill press serviceable. The turntable seized at the north end, the pit walls square. 11 miles of branch rail up to the Redwater summit, still down, still spiked, the county holding the right-of-way since '55 for a road it never built. And in stall number 2, underlaced canvas, 1 locomotive. She did not know what she was looking at, so she wrote down what she could see. 2 small wheels in front. 8 drivers, a number plate on the smokebox, with a 9 on it under a coat of grease. A brass builder's plate dated 1910 from a works in Philadelphia. Toby Renner turned out to be worth 4 men. He had been raised on a dryland place and could fix a stovepipe. He ate like a threshing crew, and in the evenings he sat by the stove and copied her column over in a better hand than hers. He was the one who found the door. It was at the back of stall 2, up a short iron stair on a mezzanine, and it was no roundhouse door. It was steel plate laid over oak, hung on 3 heavy-pinned hinges, and where the keyhole ought to have been there was a smooth gray plug. "That is lead," Toby said, picking at it with a nail. Somebody melted lead into the lock. Ruth put her hand on the steel. Then she stepped back and looked up and worked it out. The office on that mezzanine had 1 window, set high in the outer wall above the arch of stall 2, facing the county road. "That is the window," she said. "That is the one that burns." Toby went out into the snow and came back stamping. "There is a meter on the outside wall by the man door. The disc is turning. Slow, but it is turning. There is a conduit off it, and it goes up under the eave and in through the brick, right about where that room is. Beside the door frame, scratched into the soft brick with a nail in strokes an inch high, somebody had written October the 29th, 1952. The day the last fire was dropped at Ardmore. Mrs. Sunberg. Toby had his hand on the cold steel. Who fills a lock with lead and then pays the light bill for 7 years on the room behind it? She was 3 days getting that door open, and she did it slowly and in order and with the cost written down. The lock was not worth attacking, so she went at the hinges. The pins had been peened over at the bottom, so they could not be driven up, which told her that whoever hung that door had thought about a woman with a hammer. She soaked the hinges in penetrating oil, morning and night, for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, Toby held a cold chisel while she swung a 2-pound hammer and cut the peened head off the bottom pin. And then they drove the pins out with a punch, 40 minutes a hinge. The door came away from the frame with a sound like a hand pulled off frozen metal, and they walked it down and leaned it against the mezzanine rail, and cold dead air came out of that room and went past them down the stair. The bulb was burning, a plain 40-watt bulb in a porcelain fixture in the middle of the ceiling, a light since the fall of '52, which by the arithmetic of it is better than 61,000 hours, and is not possible, and was true anyway. Under it stood the Roundhouse foreman's office, exactly as it had been left. A roll-top desk, closed, a drafting stool. A coal stove, cold and blacked. A calendar from 1952 with nothing marked on it. 4 steel shelves with 30 years of flu records and boiler washes standing on them in ledgers, each spine labeled in that small, upright hand. A cot folded against the wall, squared, and on the closed lid of the roll-top, under a glass paperweight with a B in it, an envelope gone the color of weak tea, with 4 words written across the face of it. To whoever opens this, Ruth looked at that envelope for a good while. Toby had the sense to go stand by the stair and study his boots. Then she sat down on the drafting stool, and she opened it, and she read it out loud, because the room had been waiting a long time to be talked to. To whoever opens this, my name is Emil Sundberg. I hired out here in the spring of 1919, and I have been foreman since 1938, and on the 29th of October, 1952, they dropped the last fire at Ardmore and told me to see the property secured. Engine number 9 came here new in 1910, the year the town was surveyed. She is the last of her class on this system, and the last steam locomotive standing in this state, and they mean to cut her up for the scrap price, and the men here would not have that, and neither would I. She is not junk. She is dry. She is oiled. And she is barred over 1/4 turn on the last Sunday of every month, so the rods do not take a set. There are 2 pans of lime in her firebox, and her flues are plugged. Do not build a fire in her until a state man has passed the boiler, and pay him his fee, and do not argue with him. The dues book is in the desk. 41 men have paid into this since 1953, 50 cents the month, and 11 of them are on pensions, and have no business giving me anything. The account is at the bank in town under the Ardmore Engine Association, and the passbook is with the dues book. The light is on that account, $1.90 the month, standing order. The light is not sentiment. A meter that turns is an occupied building on the county books, and an occupied building does not get condemned, and a building that does not get condemned does not get sold for brick. That light is the only lawyer we could afford. I put lead in the lock because a man who found this room would have had it sold by Friday. Whoever you are, if you are reading this, you got in here with your own hands and your own time. And that is the only test I know how to set. If you can, run her for the town's 50th in July of 1960. If you cannot, cover her up again and pay the light and hand this letter to somebody who can, because she has outlasted every man who ever laughed at her, and she will outlast me. Emil Sundberg. 40 years in this building. The 29th of October, 1952. Ruth read the last line twice. Then she folded the letter along its old creases and set it on the desk and put the paperweight back on it, and said, in a voice that came out very level, he never said one word to me. Maybe he could not, Toby said. He could have. Mrs. Sundberg, the boy was looking at the shelves. There is a passbook here. The roll-top came up on its cords, sweet and easy, oiled. Inside were the dues book, the association charter written out on tablet paper and signed by 41 men, a boiler inspection card from 52, a bank passbook, and a bundle of paid power receipts on a string, 84 of them, $1.90 apiece. Ruth added the dues column twice, because Mabel Ostrand had taught her at 17 that a sum you have only added once is a rumor. $1,260 in dues. $340 from brass and copper sold off the dead wire. $1,000 even, deposited in 92 separate entries across 7 years, out of a caretaker's $29 week. $264.11 of bank interest, less $159.60 paid to the power company, $2,704.51. She wrote the total on the flyleaf of the dues book in ink, dated it, signed it, and sat back on the stool under the burning bulb. There was one thing left on the desk that she did not open that night. A japanned tin box, black, with a gold line around the lid, the kind that holds documents, and painted across the top of it in white letters, in a hand she had known for 31 years, was her own name. She opened it at first light, alone, with her coat still buttoned. There was not much in it, and that was the point of it. His pocket watch, wound down with the chain. Her mother's wedding ring, pawned in Havre in the winter of '54, and given up for good. The redemption ticket lay folded under it, dated 11 months later. A photograph of the shop crew on the turntable in 1938. And one sheet of tablet paper, headed with the year 1952, comparing what the city job paid against what the caretaker's job paid. By the week, by the year, and over 7 years, worked out to $24,388. He had not written a word under it. He had only added it up, twice, in ink, and then gone and done it. Ruth put the sheet back in the box and closed the lid and sat with her hands flat on it. "All right, Emile," she said. "All right. You could have told me. But all right." She went to the bank on the 15th of December with the passbook, the charter, and the letter in a grocery sack. That bank had known her 31 years as the woman who came in on Fridays to cash a small check, and for 9 months it had served her with the briskness town's use on widows they have written off. She laid the passbook on the counter, and the cashier came back with the president, and the president read the charter standing up. "Mrs. Sundberg, do you understand what this account is? It is 41 men's dues and my husband's wages, and it is $2,704.51, and I have added it twice. The signatory is deceased. The charter says the account follows the property. I own the property. I have the recorded deed, and it cost me $4.50 to record it, and here is that receipt too." He read another minute. Then he did something she remembered for the rest of her life, which was that he pulled a chair around from his side of the counter and set it for her. "Sit down," he said. "I will need to make some telephone calls, and you may as well be comfortable while I make them." By the 20th she had a signature card, a checkbook, and the first estimate she had ever asked a man for in her life. Wendell Fisk was 66, a boilermaker let go at Ardmore in '52, who had spent 7 years putting sheet metal on grain bins, and he had hands like split flags and a habit of standing back from a thing before he touched it. "Roof first," he said, with his cap in his hands. "You do not spend a dime on that engine before the roof, because water is the only thing out here that works every single day. What have you got?" $2,700 and change. That will not do the 6 stalls on the east. Then it will do stalls 1 through 5, the shop building, and stall 2 over the office, and the east 6 can stand open until they fall down or until I can pay for them." Fisk looked at her a moment. "That is exactly what Emile would have said. I have been told. Tin runs $2.10 the sheet delivered to the county road. You will want 240 sheets to do it right and lap it proper." He worked his jaw. "I am $12 a day, and I do not work Sundays. $12 a day, paid in cash the day you work, and I will not ask you for a Sunday. Who is going to help me? There is a boy here who is worth 4 men, and there is me. You are 54 years old. I am 54 years old, and I carried 30 men's dinner up a platform for 6 years," Ruth said. You put me where you want me. Otis Frawley came out next, 44. A welder with a face burned red from the eyes down, $10 a day, and he gave her 22 of them across the winter, cutting out rotten smoke jacks and building up the turntable ring. Roy Kellum, 38, tinsmith, $9 a day, 18 days, and he brought his own boy on Saturdays and would not take money for him. They worked in the cold from the 5th of January. 240 sheets of tin at that price came to $504. Fisk to $372. Frawley to $220. Kellum to $162. Each man was paid in cash the day he worked, and Ruth wrote every payment in ink in the deuce book on the pages after Emil's last entry, so that the column simply went on. By the 1st of March, she had $11.40 of her own money left, and the roof over 5 stalls. The shop and the office did not leak anywhere. That was the month Wendell Fisk stopped in the office doorway on his way out and said the things she had been going around for 11 weeks. Mrs. Sundberg, you have not asked me the question yet. Which question? You have got a boiler in there that has stood cold 7 winters with lime in the box, and no state man has passed it since '52. If vote comes out here and condemns her, you have got 110,000 brick, a lathe, and a very large paperweight. He put his cap on. Now, you want to know what I think your odds are? The men started coming on Sundays in March, which was the month the letter got loose in town. She had not published it. She had read it once, out loud, to 11 people in the back of the cafe on a Sunday afternoon, because Halvor Nyquist had asked her to, and because a courthouse hallway had taught her that a thing said in the open cannot be argued about afterward. The cafe went quiet in the middle of it and stayed quiet after it. Then the old hostler stood up, 82 years old, with his cap in his fist, and turned around to the room. I want to say a thing, he said. For 7 years this town has said Emil Sundberg drank his pay or kept a woman in Havre. I heard it in this room. I heard it from 2 of you sitting right there. Nobody looked at anybody. He asked me in '52 not to say what he was doing, and I asked him why, and he said if the road heard there was money in that building they would send a torch crew. And if the county heard the building was worth something, they would raise the taxes on a woman who could not pay them. So I kept my mouth shut for 7 years, and let you say what you said about him. That was the price. He paid it, and I paid it, and his wife paid the most of it, and she paid it not knowing what for, which is the worst kind there is. A man down the counter said, Halvor, we did not know. No, you did not go out and look, Halvor Nyquist said. That is not the same thing. By the end of that month, 19 of the 41 names in that book had been out to the property, and they came on a Sunday after church in their second-best coats, and they did not make speeches. A retired machinist reground the throttle seat. Fisk re-rolled 204 boiler flues at $1.20 apiece. Somebody's grandson chipped 7 years of pigeon out of the smoke box and was sick twice and came back. Ruth fed them, and that was her half of it. And no small half either. There were Sundays that spring when she fed 40 off a plank across 2 sawhorses, and the woman who had been served briskly by a bank in October found herself with a kitchen again. Gwen Tolliver came up from the State Historical Society in April, 49 years old. In a raincoat and low heels entirely wrong for that ballast, with a clipboard and a camera, she walked around the engine 3 times without saying anything. Mrs. Sundberg, I want to be careful how I say this. Say it plainly. I have had a great deal of careful. I have looked for a complete steam locomotive in this state for 6 years. There are 2 on pedestals in city parks with their rods cut and their fireboxes filled with concrete. There is a tender at a fair grounds. Everything else went to the torch between 53 and 57. Gwen Tolliver put her hand on the number plate. This is the last one. Not the last one in a park. The last one that could ever turn a wheel under its own steam. The rest of the country believes there is nothing left out here. There was a light on, Ruth said. Cyrus Vogt, state boiler inspector, 60 years old, came on the 9th of May, and he was not charmed by anybody, and did not intend to be. I have condemned 4 of these in 2 years, and I am told every time that it is a shame, he said. It is a shame. It is also a boiler. He was there 3 days. He put a mirror and a light in through the washout holes. He sounded the sheets with a hammer for an entire morning, and he read the flu records Emil Sundberg had kept in labeled ledgers from 1938 forward, and it was the ledgers that changed his face. Who kept these? My husband. Nobody keeps records like this. He did. On the 3rd day they filled her cold and pumped her up on the hydrostatic to 270 pounds against a working pressure of 180, and 31 people stood out on the table in the rain and watched a gauge for 40 minutes, which is the least dramatic thing that has ever held a crowd. She held without a tear. Cyrus Vogt signed the card on the hood of his car and took his $15. The lime in the firebox is what saved her, he said. That, and somebody barring her over every month for 7 years, which I did not believe when I read it, and believe now. Mrs. Sundberg, you may build a fire in that engine. On the final Sunday in May, Ruth Sundberg laid a clean linen towel on the desk under the burning bulb and set 4 things out on it in a row. A brass lunchroom meal check, thin as a leaf, with the number worn clean off it by 40 years of thumbs. Her mother's steel thimble with the dent in the crown. The photograph of 31 men standing on the turntable in 1938, with Emil at the end of the 2nd row and his cap pushed back. And a wound-down pocket watch on a chain. She thought about Mabel Ostrand, who wrote once a month now from Spokane in a hand gone shaky, and who had said, under a drugstore awning in the snow, that nothing is scrapped till the last man who knew its worth quits looking at it, and had then handed over the only piece of brass she owned. She thought about the 3 of them in the courthouse hallway, and found, somewhat to her disappointment, that she could not work up anything about it. It had passed over, as weather passes over. Dwight had sent a card at Christmas. Lyle Pruitt never came out to look, in December or in April, and neither did anybody who laughed that day. There was nothing to forgive that was worth the fuel it would take to burn. They lit the first fire in engine number 9 on the 11th of June, 1960, at 4 in the morning, with a wood fire under 6 tons of coal that had cost $11 a ton. It took 11 hours to raise steam on a boiler that cold, and nobody left. At 3 the needle came off the pin and walked, and at 6:15, with 40 people out on the table, Wendell Fisk put his hand on the whistle cord, and then took it off again, and looked at Ruth. That is not mine to pull, he said. She climbed up. She was 54 years old, and she had first come up into that cab in December with a flashlight in her teeth, and now the deck plate was hot through her shoes, and the injector was singing, and the whole enormous thing was breathing under her hands. She pulled the cord down slow and let it up. 11 miles away in Ardmore, in kitchens, in the cafe, in the churchyard, in a town that had not heard that sound since October of 1952, people came out of their houses into the street and stood there. Halvor Nyquist was sitting on an upturned bucket by the sand house when she came down, and he was crying without any embarrassment at all. "There is one more thing he told me to say to you," he said. and he said to say it on the day she runs, not before. The 4th of July, 1960 was the town's 50th birthday, and the 50th birthday of engine number 9, which had come new off a flat car in 1910 to a town 3 months older than she was. They ran her at 11 in the morning from the yard up 11 miles of county right-of-way to the Redwater summit and back, with 4 flat cars borrowed from a grain elevator, swept and railed with 2x4s, hay bales for seats, and a state permit for 10 miles an hour that they did not once exceed. Tickets were $2 for grown people and 50 cents for children, and Toby Renner sold them at a card table by the sand house. 300 adults, 112 children. $656 counted twice at the kitchen table that night and entered in ink. The whole county came from 90 miles out. 200 people stood at the summit who had driven up on the gravel just to see her come around the shoulder of the hill with the smoke standing straight up in the July air. At the summit, while the crew watered her, Halvor Nyquist came along the flat cars and got Ruth by the sleeve and walked her out into the grass away from everybody. In 52, the road offered to sell him this engine outright, the old man said. Scrap price, $480. He did not have $480, and he would not put a paper on the house, because the house was yours, and he said a man does not gamble a woman's roof on a machine. Halvor Nyquist looked down the train, so he did it the slow way instead, which took him 7 years and cost him $24,000 in wages he never made, and he told me if she ever ran I was to tell you this and nothing else. He said I could not leave her money, so I left her a town. Ruth Sundberg stood in the grass at the top of the Redwater grade with her hand over her mouth, which is the only time in this entire story that her face got away from her. There is a price at which a town stops arguing about a thing and agrees, all at once, that it is dead. Ardmore had set that price at $200 in December, in a hallway, in front of 11 witnesses, and by July, the same town was standing 4 deep along a fence in the sun to watch the dead thing come home with its bell going. The Roundhouse is still there. The East 6 stalls came under roof in 1962 out of excursion money and a lease of 2 bays to the Historical Society at $40 the month. Toby Renner never did get to Billings. Ruth Sundberg went out to the property 6 days a week until she was 79. There is a bronze plate on the brick beside the office door out there, and it does not have her name on it. It has 41 names, in the order they appear in the dues book, and at the bottom it says that the light in this room was paid by a caretaker at $1.90 a month, so that a building could not be called empty. It was the best $200 anybody in that county ever spent. Here is the thing that stays with me about it, and I have thought about it a great deal. Nobody in that hallway was wrong about the arithmetic. The roof really was gone over 6 stalls. The taxes really were owed. A widow with $406 had no business buying 11 stalls of brick at the end of a dead branch line, and every person who laughed was working from figures that were perfectly correct. They were only missing one thing, and it was not information. It was 11 miles of gravel road and 1 afternoon. Not one of them ever drove out to look. That is almost always how it goes. The people who write a thing off are seldom lying to you. They are reporting, in a confident voice, on a place they have never been. And the thing goes on standing out there in the weather, oiled, swept, barred over a quarter turn on the last Sunday of the month, with somebody's small, stubborn light burning in an upstairs window, waiting for one person to come up the road and actually walk in. Do not be too quick to price what you have not looked at. That includes buildings, and it includes towns, and it includes the quiet people you live with, who sometimes cannot say what they are doing and can only be found out by opening the door they left you. If this one got hold of you, do us a kindness. Hit like and subscribe and pass it to somebody who was told the thing they were left was worthless, because that person is generally sitting on more than they know. And tell us before you go, would you have laid your last $200 on a building the whole county had already buried? Or would you have taken the $300 in the hallway and walked out clean while you still could? Bank your fire, leave the door open a crack, and keep your accounts in ink. We will see you by the next one.